I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume. So I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing with our reading in the Gospels. Christ has been preaching in Galilee. He's been doing a lot of miracles, of course, but he's been preaching. He had the great discourse on a house divided cannot stand, and blasphemy against the Holy Ghost, and various other things. This in response to the Pharisees accusing him of casting out devils in the name of devils. As part of this, he's also been teaching a lot of parables, which we have been reading. Parable of the sower, parable of the wheat and tares, the mustard seed, the candlestick, all these parables, a number of them. We are now going to move beyond the parables, and we're now going to read a story contained in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, generally fairly brief, and so we will read it in all three Gospels. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. So first, let us turn to Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. And when he entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him, and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he saith unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose, and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? This is a fairly famous story. I think it's actually he'll calm the winds again later on, but this is the first time that we have him actually. See, all of his miracles up to this point have been healing, with the exception of turning water into wine very early on, his first miracle. Other than that, he's been healing. Curing the lame, curing the blind, casting out devils, raising the dead a few times. But this time, he is commanding nature. The earth itself is listening to him and obeying. There are few prophets who have done this in recorded history. Moses did it a few times, and Elijah did it. But other than them, I'm not sure I know of any prophet who has commanded nature in this way. So Christ is once again showing himself to be truly great. Now, I do want to point out one brief thing here before we look at the Joseph Smith translation, is that we've been reading in Matthew chapter 12 and 13. And you'll note now we're going back to chapter 8. We read some of chapter 8 before we read the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5. And so we see Matthew skipping around a lot. Matthew is the one that really doesn't record things in chronological order very much. Luke has a few things out of order. We have skipped around a little bit there. John and Mark generally are chronological. We just follow through on with them. But Matthew really skips around a lot, and that's because of his purpose and his writing style. As I mentioned in my introduction to the Gospels, that Matthew seems to be writing in a series of sermon, action, leading up to the atonement. And he has it separated into these seven sections. And there's a purpose in this. And it doesn't mean that what he records didn't happen, but he records it more in a literary way than in a historical narrative for the purpose of his writing. So we need to understand that, and you'll see that a lot. With Matthew, we're going to skip around a lot until we get to the actual crucifixion. And even then, I think we skip around a little bit. But Matthew is definitely more out of order than any of the other Gospels. But now let us look at the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew here. First, we have in verse 23, we changed the followed to came unto him. Verse 25 is, instead of came to him, it's came unto him. And that last, instead of just we perish, it's else we perish. And then in verse 26, we change saith to said. And that is it. Minor grammatical corrections. So now we move on to Mark. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship asleep on a pillow. And they awake him, and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now, of course, this story, we have a very nice hymn based on this story called Master, the Tempest is Raging, and it is taken primarily from this version in Mark. But we don't really get too much new information here. That we do know that when he was preaching, he was teaching the people in parables and everything, he was in a ship just offshore. And so now he's saying, let's go to the other side of the sea. He doesn't have to get out of the ship. That's what he's saying. He's saying he's already in the ship, so that ship just leaves. And there are other little ships that follow after him. This would be the rest of his entourage. The ship he's in might be big enough for him and the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles, but there are others who are traveling with him. His entourage is still with him, and they are in other ships, and they're going as a small convoy across the sea. They're all in threat by the storm. Christ calms the storms all the same. That's the only new information we have here, is that there are multiple ships. So let us now look at the Joseph Smith translation in Mark. We have very little here. Looks like just minor grammatical updates. In verse 35, changing saith to said. Down in 38 says, And they awake him and say unto him, we have a correction, and they awoke him and said unto him. So we're changing the present tense to past tense. But this is a little interesting in verse 37, where it says, And the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. We have this correction. The waves beat over into the ship. No, there's no mention there of the ship being full. If the ship was actually full, it would have sunk. And so the waves are beating up over into the ship. Water is getting into the ship, but it is not to the point of sinking. They're afraid it will sink eventually, but it's not quite to that point yet. But mainly grammatical corrections again, so we leave that there. Now let's move on to Luke. Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over unto the other side of the lake. And they launched forth. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water, and were in jeopardy. And they came to him, and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose, and rebuked the wind, and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and the water, and they obey him. Again, no new information. It's just a slightly different wording of the same story. Now, Luke doesn't put this on any specific timeline. He just says there was a time that he went out into the ship. So Luke seems to be more giving us episodes. He says, well, he did this, and he did this, and he did this. And primarily it's in a chronological order, but they're not necessarily tied together. They're just episodes to show Christ's power, because he's trying to show the Gentile philosophers that Christ truly is God. Again, the purpose of his writing shows us the reason for his style of writing. Now let us look at the Joseph Smith translation for Luke. The only correction we have here is in verse 23, near the end. It says, And they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. We have this correction. And they were filled with fear and were in jeopardy. Again, the water did not sink the ship. It was not enough to sink the ship, but it was enough to cause them to fear. Now, I will point out, when Christ says, where is your faith? It's kind of just like in the hymn, No waters can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and skies. I'm with you. Why would you even think that there was a possibility that the ship I am in would sink? God is, the prophecy, God gave the angels command over Christ, lest at any time he should dash his foot on a stone. Why do you think God would even consider letting the ship sink if I'm in it? That's what he's talking about when he says, where is your faith? But this video is long enough, so we will leave it here. We're actually going to be reading about the legion of devils and the swine next, so I will see you there.